Hello, my dear grandchildren. I have a very nice story here that I'd like to read to you called Mr. MacNally's Hat. It's another story by Shirley Hughes. One morning, Mum took Alfie across the street to Mrs. MacNally's house to be looked after by Mrs. MacNally, while she and Annie Rose went to see the doctor. Mrs. MacNally was a very busy person. She did a lot of dusting and polishing and vacuuming, and she cleaned her windows until they sparkled and shone. That morning, Mrs. MacNally was having what she called a good clear out. So she and Alfie went upstairs, and Alfie pushed his toy cars about on the bedroom floor, while Mrs. MacNally pulled everything out of the big cupboard. She folded the shirts and trousers carefully and put them on the bed. Then she started to sort out the rest of the things. What is Alfie doing while Mrs. MacNally is working? Can you tell? What is he playing with? Can you see? Looks like he has his cars and trucks there. It's really a very helpful thing when moms or dads or whoever is taking care of you, when they're busy working. It's really very helpful if you have something like that that you can play with, isn't it? I think that was a very good idea Alfie had, to bring those cars and trucks. So now they're getting some piles of things on the floor. Alfie stopped playing and helped her put the clothes into different piles. Well, that was helpful. That was nice. When they found a pair, how many is a pair? Do you know? A pair is two, like two gloves or two socks. That's a pair. When they found a pair of Mr. MacNally's socks or gloves, they put them together. When they found an odd sock or glove, they put that into another pile until they found the pair for it. Soon the whole floor, as well as the bed, was covered with neat piles of matching clothes. At last, from the very back of the cupboard, Mrs. MacNally brought out a large black hat. "Goodness, there's that awful hat," she said, dusting it off with her sleeve and holding it up to the light. Does Alfie think it looks like an awful hat? He looks rather interested in it, doesn't he? I'm not sure he thinks it looks as awful as Mrs. MacNally seems to think it does. Let's see. That's a funny picture, isn't it? Would you say that the hat is a little bit too big for Alfie's head? It might be, huh? The hat looked quite new. Mrs. MacNally told Alfie that Mr. MacNally had bought it to wear at a very special occasion, and that he had paid a lot of money for it. He thought it would give him height, Mrs. MacNally said. But she didn't think that the hat suited Mr. MacNally at all well, so it had hung unworn on the peg in the hall for a long time, until in the end she had taken it down and put it at the very back of the cupboard, where she hoped that Mr. MacNally would forget all about it. And he had. Alfie thought that Mr. MacNally's hat was a very good hat indeed. He tried it on in front of the big mirror. At first he couldn't see anything at all. but when he pushed it up a bit, he could just see out. Look at silly Alfie here. He's enjoying wearing that hat, isn't he? While Mrs. McNally put all the clothes tidily back into the cupboard, Alfie walked up and down in the hat. When Mum came to collect him, see, there's Mum and Annie Rose coming to get Alfie, right? When Mum came to collect him, Mrs. McNally said he had been such a good, helpful boy all morning that if he liked, he could take the hat home with him and keep it. Alfie thanked Mrs. McNally and put all his cars into the hat to carry them back across the street. Well, see, he was already finding that hat helpful, using it to carry all his cars and trucks. There's Alfie in his bed, and there's the hat. Alfie liked Mr. McNally's hat so much that he wore it for the rest of the day. It had some dents in it, but he punched them all out so that the top was smooth and rounded. At bedtime, he put the hat carefully at the bottom of his bed. The next morning, he wore the hat to nursery school. Mrs. Palmer, his teacher, said that it was such a beautiful hat that it would be safer if Alfie hung it up with the coats while they were indoors. Haha, but now they've gone outside, haven't they? Can you see what they're doing? That's a lot of children playing, isn't it? Can you see them playing? Here's Alfie. You see Alfie there? And so this is one of his friends wearing the hat. Right? I think we know who this is, don't we? Who's that friend? Is that Bernard or is this Bernard? It's hard to tell. Well, they're all Alfie's friends, aren't they? But when it was time to go outside in the yard where the climbing frame and the slide and all the trucks and trolleys were, Alfie put on the hat again. All the other children crowded round, and Alfie let them take turns at trying it on. Then they invented a very good game in which the person who was wearing the hat ran about, chasing all the other people. And if someone got caught, then it was their turn to wear the hat. Well, that sounds like a fun game, doesn't it? Sort of a game of tag. That sounds like a very fun game. And there's Alfie with the hat. And Annie Rose watching him, right? Hard to get that whole picture in there. Can you see it now? There we go. For the next few days, Alfie wore the hat a lot. When he got tired of wearing it, he put it at the bottom of the toy cupboard, where he kept his special things. Annie Rose found it. There's Annie Rose. Annie Rose found it there and made it into a bed for her lamb. That makes a good bed too, doesn't it? But soon they both forgot about the hat altogether. One of Alfie's very good friends was the milkman. Alfie liked to watch out for him coming up the street in his milk float. Isn't that a funny name for a truck? When he came whistling up the steps to leave the milk on the doorstep of Alfie's house, Alfie would wave from the window, and the milkman always waved back. And when Mom and Alfie met him out delivering the milk around the neighborhood, he would call out, "Whatcha, mate? How's yourself?" And Alfie would call back, "Fine, thanks, mate." Then the milkman would give them a thumbs up okay sign as he drove on. Well, the milkman and Alfie are very good friends, aren't they? Can you see that picture? The milkman coming to the door. What do you notice about that picture? He's bringing the milk, but what else is going on there? Can you tell? There's a lot of rain coming down, isn't there? In cold weather, the milkman sometimes wore a woolly hat, but the rest of the time he didn't wear anything on his head at all. One wet morning when the rain was pouring down, Alfie looked out of the window and saw the milkman running up the steps of their house with all his hair soaking and plastered down his forehead. The raindrops were dripping down his nose and off the end of his beard. Alfie had a very kind thought. See, Alfie's nice and dry because he's in the house. But he can see that his friend the milkman is very wet. He had a kind thought. Can you see what his kind thought was? What did he decide to do? Can you tell? Let's read it. While Mum was paying the milkman, Alfie went to the toy cupboard and brought out Mr. MacNally's black hat. Then he ran to the door. "Here's a present for you," he said, holding it out. "It's to keep your head dry." "Thanks a lot," said the milkman, looking at the hat. "That's a good hat, that is," he said. Then he clapped it onto his head, went off down the steps, and drove off. Well, that was a very kind thing for Alfie to do, wasn't it? And it looks like that hat will be just right for keeping the milkman's head dry. But the next time Alfie saw the milkman, he wasn't wearing the hat, nor the time after that. "Doesn't he like the hat I gave him?" Alfie asked Mum anxiously. But Mum said, "Oh, I'm sure he likes it a lot. It's just that the weather's been fine, and I expect he's keeping it for a rainy day." The next time it rained, Alfie was at the window waiting for the milkman to come up the street. But when at last the milk float stopped outside Alfie's house and the milkman came up the steps, he still wasn't wearing the hat. Uh-oh. Now that's not a way we see Alfie very often, is it? How is he feeling in that picture? He's feeling sad, isn't he? Can you see how sad he is? His face shows that he's sad, and the tears coming from his eyes show that he's sad, don't they? Alfie was so upset that he burst into tears. And when the milkman saw his sad face at the window, he rang the doorbell even though it wasn't payday. Mum and Alfie hurried to the door. "What's up, mate?" the milkman asked Alfie. "You aren't wearing the hat I gave you," sobbed Alfie. Then the milkman said, "Come along with me, and you'll see why not." What do you think the milkman's going to show Alfie? Do you have any ideas? He says he's going to show Alfie why he's not wearing the hat. I'm very curious why he wouldn't be, because you can see all the rain in the picture and his head is dripping wet again. Let's see what it's about. Okay, so there's Alfie, and he has his rain clothes on. And there's the milkman, and I can see the hat. Can you see it? But it isn't on the milkman's head. Then Mum helped Alfie to put on his mac and boots and rain hat, and he and the milkman went out into the street to where the milk float was. Then the milkman hoisted Alfie up and plumped him down next to the driver's seat. There on the seat was the hat. Alfie looked inside, and guess what he saw? What is in the hat? Can you tell what it is? A little puppy curled up, fast asleep with his paws over his nose. He had floppy black ears and a black tail. "He's a stray," the milkman told Alfie. A stray is an animal that doesn't have any home. A lady up the street found him on her doorstep, all wet and shivering, so I took him along with me. Alfie touched the puppy's back very gently. It felt firm and warm. "He just got into that hat and settled down as though he'd slept in it all his life," said the milkman. "Me and the wife have been thinking about getting a dog, so if nobody claims him, I will keep him." Just then the puppy opened his eyes and licked Alfie's hand. And at that moment, Alfie couldn't think of a better use for Mr. McNally's hat. What do you think? Is that a good use for Mr. McNally's hat? I think that's a pretty good way to use Mr. McNally's old hat, isn't it? All right, I hope you enjoyed the story. I love you.